I didn't laugh. That was my first sin, apparently. When I saw the place card, beige linen cardstock, gold trim, elegant calligraphy spelling out idiot trash, I didn't laugh. Not even a twitch. Just stood there, blinking, while the table erupted like hyenas. My wife, her boss, two junior partners, and one of those sales guys who always wears a Bluetooth earpiece even during dinner. They all found it hilarious. "Come on, babe, it's a joke," she said, smirking, already a glass and a half in. Her nails were cherry red and drumming on the table like she was keeping rhythm with the humiliation. I sat down, not because I accepted it, because I wanted to see how far they'd go. She had chosen the table, table 4, front and center, just off the stage with the spotlight grazing the white tablecloth like a warning flare. A massive floral arrangement bloomed in the middle, drowning out sight lines and giving everyone a little privacy for their whispers and side eyes. The seat across from me, her boss, Leonard, had a crooked smile and a cufflink shaped like a middle finger. Real classy guy. He leaned toward her and muttered something behind his palm, loud enough for me to catch the tail end. More useful when he was quiet. Huh? She laughed. That laugh. The one she saves for networking events and Botox brunches. It's hollow, bored. A sound she makes with her mouth while her eyes scan the room for someone richer. I looked down at the name card again. Idiot trash. Not Jonathan. Not Mr. Harris. Not even a misspelling. Just 2 words, printed in serif font and placed like a signature under the company logo. That's when I knew this wasn't a last-minute prank. Someone approved this. Someone sent it to print. Someone folded it. Someone put it at my spot like it belonged there. Leonard toasted the table. To our honorary guest. Hope the food's not too complicated. He raised his glass and looked me dead in the eye. You've come a long way from sheet metal and torque wrenches, huh? That's what she told him. That's what she tells everyone. That I was some blue-collar dolt who got lucky marrying into the firm. That I barely understood what she did. That I spent my days counting bolts and reading instruction manuals upside down. She rewrote my life into a parody because the truth was too boring and too threatening. I didn't start with much, sure, but the man she married? He could read a balance sheet in his sleep. He didn't need to understand corporate culture to know exactly how this room operated. I smiled. Not the kind they expected. Not a weak, wounded attempt at salvaging dignity. No, the kind of smile that made the back of my neck go cold. The kind of smile that said, I see you, all of you, and I'm remembering every single detail. The waiter brought steak. I cut into it politely, methodically. I didn't speak once. Not when her boss made another joke about engine grease and elbow wrenches. Not when she rolled her eyes after I declined the wine pairings. Not when the new hire whispered to her colleague, and both looked at me like I had spinach on my tie. I just sat, breathed, and calculated. Not revenge. Not yet. But awareness. Inventory. Dessert came, some kind of mousse with edible gold leaf. The inside of my chest was thumping, but my hand didn't shake when I lifted the spoon. I took one bite. Bitter. Overcompensating. I placed the spoon down gently, dabbed the corners of my mouth with the napkin like a man in full control, then stood up. She barely noticed. She was too busy whispering to Leonard again. Probably something about how I'd go home and sulk and she'd handle the spin. I didn't walk toward the restrooms. Didn't head for the coat check. I walked across the ballroom, past the fake laughter, the self-congratulatory clinks of crystal glasses, past the stage where the CEO had given his earlier speech about next-gen disruption and agile leadership. I found the firm's president near the bar, talking with a man from their advisory board. They were mid-conversation, but when he saw me approach, his face shifted like someone just cut the power. He knew who I was. Not because we talked often, but because he had seen one particular name pop up on one particular trust document 6 months ago. A name that made him pause. That name was mine. He started to greet me, some canned corporate pleasantry, but I raised a hand. Just 2 fingers. He went silent. I leaned in, whispered 2 sentences. That's all it took. His jaw tightened. His nod was slight, like a man trying not to draw attention. But the shift was seismic. In that moment, everything changed. Not for me, but for them. I turned and walked away. Past the centerpiece. Past the table. Past my wife, still too wrapped up in her own little pageant to notice what had just detonated under her feet. I didn't take the place card. I left it there. Let someone else pick up the evidence. I didn't need it anymore. The real joke was about to start, and this time, I was the one who wrote the punchline. The first time she made the joke about me, not understanding corporate life. We were at a dinner just like that one. Long table, name cards, overpriced salmon, and a room full of people who smiled too much with their teeth and not enough with their eyes. It was one of her early firm milestones. Year 2, I think. She was still nervous then, still wore heels that hurt, and checked her phone under the table to see if any clients had responded to her proposals. Back then, she'd squeeze my hand when she was stressed. Back then, she still looked at me like I was with her, not just near her. That night, I'd made a joke about the wine tasting like nail polish remover. Everyone laughed. She didn't. She turned to me, half grinning, and said, "Sorry, he's not really corporate. He's more nuts and bolts." It stung. Not enough to ruin the night. Just enough that I remembered it. And that memory came back hard as I drove home from this dinner. The name card still floating in my mind like smoke from a trash fire. I didn't touch the steering wheel tighter than I had to. Didn't blast music. Didn't rehearse a confrontation. I just drove. The kind of driving you do when your brain is slicing through paperwork faster than the tires touch asphalt. She never once asked how her firm got its start. Oh, sure. She thanked me when I helped her put together a pitch deck for her initial funding round. She said, "You're the best," and kissed me on the cheek the night we heard the Series A was approved. But she never once asked how the capital got there so quickly. Never asked why the terms were so favorable. Why the paperwork barely needed editing. She thought I pulled a few strings with some finance guy I knew. She didn't know the finance guy was me. When her father died, the firm was little more than a logo, 3 laptops, and a lot of promises. She was scrambling. She needed liquidity, fast. I handled the probate, the taxes, the real estate, the bequests to extended family. I made it all quiet and clean. In the middle of all that, I made one small suggestion, one she barely registered at the time. Why don't we wrap the inheritance into a blind trust? I said, for tax shielding, long-term asset protection. She didn't ask details, just nodded, signed what I put in front of her. She was too busy worrying about her LinkedIn profile and the color scheme of her website to care about estate structures. The firm needed operating capital. I loaned it from the trust. In exchange, she temporarily moved her ownership stake, 80% of the company, into the trust itself. On paper, it looked brilliant. Kept her name off the majority holdings, which was helpful for the optics she wanted, a woman-owned, lean startup structure with grassroots flair. No old money baggage. But she missed something. Something crucial. A blind trust isn't blind to me. I was the trustee, sole trustee, meaning that even though her name was on the building, mine was on the deed. She forgot. Or maybe she never really understood. And I never reminded her. That was my mistake. I thought if she felt independent, she'd appreciate what I'd done more. I thought she'd look at me the way she used to, when I was fixing the garbage disposal at midnight, or reviewing her legal contracts while she slept, or hand-delivering pitch packets to potential angel investors. But no, she looked at me like a technician, a placeholder, a man useful only when her printer jammed. And now, after seeing her laugh as my name card mocked me in front of the people I helped empower, after watching her lean into Leonard like a girl at prom whispering secrets into her date's collarbone, now I understood something I hadn't let myself believe before. She thought I'd never use the trust. She thought I'd die first, or disappear, or just keep nodding and driving her around while she played CEO with someone else's money. She was wrong. Back in my study, I poured a drink. Nothing too strong. Just something to match the temperature of what was rising in me, not rage. Calculation. I opened my safe, pulled out a manila folder. Inside was everything. Deed assignments, trustee documentation, a merger draft, my lawyer's pre-negotiated letters of intent, all dated, reviewed, and updated quarterly for over a year. Just in case she did exactly what she did tonight. You see, power isn't about being loud. It's about being ready. And I had been ready for a long, long time. The phrase was simple. 5 words. Spoken softly, barely louder than the clink of a glass against marble tile. But it wasn't just a phrase. It was the final pin pulled from a very old grenade. I had whispered it to the president of the firm not for theatricality, but because that was the trigger. A verbal failsafe, agreed upon months ago, during one of those long, quiet dinners with my attorney in the back corner of a forgettable steakhouse 2 towns over. He had insisted I choose something natural, something I wouldn't say by accident, but wouldn't sound like espionage if overheard. We settled on an old inside joke from our college days. Harmless on its face, nuclear in its implications. He'd only ever hear it if I wanted the trust to act. That night, he heard it. The second sentence was the name. Short, sharp, unmistakable. Polaris Strat Holdings. That was the one that made the president's eyes twitch. Polaris had circled my wife's firm like a vulture for 2 years. The board treated them like Voldemort, that which must not be named. The kind of competitor you acknowledge only to scoff at, like you're too important to ever consider their offers. In private, though, they were scared. Polaris wasn't just ruthless, they were efficient. Their mergers went through like clockwork, their cuts were surgical, and they had a reputation for absorbing companies and leaving behind only a logo and a few key assets. My wife hated Polaris, said they were barbarians with checkbooks, said they'd destroy everything authentic about her brand. But she didn't know the real reason they hadn't gotten a foothold, me. Because every time they came knocking, and they did, often, I declined the offer. Quietly, through my lawyer. No drama, no board votes. Just a polite, precise rejection from the trust's holding entity. She never knew. Why would she? The trust was invisible to her, and the firm's board didn't even realize the real source of the veto. Until now. Once those two sentences left my mouth, the wheels turned fast. My attorney, Daniel, had been sitting in a suite downtown, 10 minutes from Polaris's acquisition team. He'd been ready for months. Hell, he practically begged me to let it happen earlier. "You're sitting on a tactical nuke," he said once. "Let me push the button, please." But I wasn't ready then. I still had hope. Still thought she might remember who helped her build everything. That maybe the contempt was a phase, a misstep. But contempt doesn't show up once. It simmers. It infects. The moment I sat at that table and saw that card, I realized I wasn't just collateral. I was the joke. And worse, I'd been funding it. Daniel had all the papers primed. NDAs, internal transition memos, executive severance limits, escrow documentation for assets pending dissolution. The moment I gave him the phrase, he moved. He opened the vault. Not metaphorically, literally. The safe deposit box at the regional branch of Iron Union Bank held signed backup originals of everything. Digital copies had already been time-stamped in our blockchain-secured document locker, one that didn't even list my name. A different trust, one level deeper. You don't plan something like this overnight. You plan it when you still love the person you might one day need to burn. Polaris responded within 7 minutes. Their lead negotiator had been in Boston all week. They dispatched their team across town with a signature courier and a thumb drive. The paperwork needed only 2 signatures. Mine had already been notarized. At 10:47 p.m., I got the message from Daniel. Polaris signed. Deal closed. Phase 2 initiated. Phase 2 was simple. Shut it all down. The firm's internal control structure had always been fragile. Like most startups turned mid-tier firms, they grew faster than their systems. They outsourced payroll, contracted IT. Their server access was routed through 3 layers of third-party logins and a Slack-based workflow that could be reset with a single master token, one I had. Because when the trust funded the Series B, it did so with conditions, one of which was a backdoor into every system they paid to install. While my wife danced around her boss's chair and toasted to their legacy, we had already pulled the plug on every shared drive, revoked every admin credential, and issued a staggered digital lockout starting with, ironically, her office. And still, no one knew. To them, I was just the man who didn't belong at the table. The placeholder. The dull accessory. I didn't need to shout. I didn't need to threaten. I just whispered 2 sentences, walked out the door, and let the legal architecture I built years ago finally wake up. Daniel Lowenstein doesn't wear suits from department stores. He wears bespoke Italian wool stitched so tightly it could probably survive a gunshot. He doesn't speak in run-on sentences. Every word is a chess move. Every comma, a trapdoor. He used to work for the FTC, back when mergers weren't rubber-stamped and people still got nervous when you said antitrust. He once halted a $2.7 billion consolidation between 2 defense contractors with a single footnote in a regulatory memo. The man doesn't practice law. He designs detonations. And he was mine. He wasn't my first lawyer. But after watching my original estate planner bungle a basic holding structure back in 2015, I went hunting. What I found was a man with a reputation for scorched earth precision, someone who didn't just know where the line was, but how to redraw it mid-contract. Daniel was the kind of guy you don't brag about hiring. You quietly retain him, pay his insane fees, and follow his instructions like scripture. So when I came to him 3 years ago with the trust paperwork, the ownership splits, and the story of a startup helmed by a woman who had no idea who really owned the firm, he leaned back in his chair and smiled. "She thinks it's hers?" he asked, flipping through the binder. How romantic. He didn't blink when I told him I had no interest in selling. Not then. Not yet. I just wanted it ready. In case. Like an emergency exit buried under the floorboards. We built the structure slowly. First, an amendment to the trust giving me irrevocable authority to restructure holdings in instances of material reputational harm or exposure to financial risk. That was the key phrase. We added side clauses, silent permissions baked into otherwise boring documents. No red flags to the firm. No votes required. Then we bought out a voting minority from an early investor, which gave Daniel the leverage to lock in exclusive sale authority through a clause tied to asset dilution in the event of a merger bid over a certain threshold. The numbers weren't random. Polaris knew them. They had asked before. They had been denied before. But this time Daniel had the vault open before I even reached my car. He emailed the updated bid acceptance to Polaris's team with exact timestamps and 4 pre-verified authorizations. The moment they countersigned, our servers began triggering contractual lockouts. A built-in clause from the Series B paperwork kicked in, a forced change of control clause, embedded like a sleeper agent in the fine print. That clause gave us the legal basis to revoke access for all current executive leadership immediately. No board vote. No employee warning. Just click and gone. Even better, Daniel had included a non-compete clause Polaris had insisted on years ago, but my wife's firm rejected. This time, it was in the deal, and binding. No one from the top 6 executives could work in the industry for 2 years. Not as contractors, not as advisors, not even under pseudonyms. They were iced out, and if they broke it, the clawbacks were devastating. Daniel had modeled them himself, down to the hour. The brilliance of Daniel's work wasn't just in the legal precision. It was in the timing. Polaris didn't send over their standard acquisition team. They sent the ones Daniel had handpicked as emotionally efficient, cold closers with no interest in transition drama. Their communication templates had already been drafted. Their IT team had already rehearsed the internal system takeover. Their HR contingency consultant had already shipped out cardboard boxes to the corporate HQ by 6:15 a.m. the next morning, with the firm's name stamped on them. Irony, prepackaged. The betrayal I'd swallowed at that dinner table wasn't new. It was just the final proof I needed. Proof of arrogance. Proof of contempt. My wife didn't just disrespect me. She thought I was irrelevant. Disposable. Like a paperclip in her drawer. Useful until she found a gold one. Daniel didn't ask for revenge. He asked for clarity. You sure you want to pull the trigger? He texted, right after I whispered the 2 sentences. I didn't respond with a yes. Just sent him a photo. The place card. Idiot trash. 5 minutes later, he replied, understood. Full ignition. And just like that, the machine he built started humming. Quietly. Unstoppably. By midnight, the paperwork was done. By morning, the firm would be, too. The first crack didn't come with a bang. It came with a password prompt. Just after 8 a.m., Taylor, the office manager everyone secretly feared because of her post-it note army and photographic memory, swiped her badge and sat down to find every folder in the shared drive labeled Access Denied. She tried rebooting the VPN, tried logging in with her backup credentials, tried Slack. Nothing. Just a spinning wheel and a polite message. Your session has been terminated. Please contact System Administrator. By 8:07, 2 junior associates were standing over her shoulder. Their faces looked like kids who'd just seen their parents argue for the first time. A quiet sense that something had gone very wrong. One of them whispered, "Is this another phishing test?" By 8:10, the whispers had multiplied. Her assistant, Sophie, the one who practically lived inside her Google Calendar, noticed something odd when trying to add her to a client call. Her name didn't auto-populate. Then she tried searching her manually. Nothing. No profile. No user ID. No contact card. Just a ghost where a partner used to be. Sophie refreshed twice. Then a third time. Still gone. She peeked into the corner office. Karen, my wife, was adjusting her blouse in front of the mirror like it was any other Tuesday. Hair curled. Makeup perfect. A necklace I bought her for our 5th anniversary. Still wearing it. Still pretending everything she had wasn't traced back to someone she dismissed as unambitious. Hey, Sophie said, her voice tight. I can't find you in the system. You're not showing up in anything. Karen didn't even look over. Probably another IT screw-up. Leonard'll scream at them later. Just email the link. I can't, Sophie replied. Your email's bouncing. Like, hard bouncing. Not even going to spam. Karen's eyes flicked up for a moment. She blinked, then chuckled. Jesus, he's probably pouting. Got his feelings hurt. She didn't say my name, but the disdain was baked in. He gets like this. It'll pass. Then she turned to Leonard, who was standing stiff by the window, staring at his phone like it had personally betrayed him. He hadn't spoken since he walked in. No crass joke. No smirk. Just silence. You okay? She asked him. Leonard didn't answer right away, just kept scrolling through emails. When he did speak, his voice was too low for Sophie to hear. But I know what he said, because at that moment, he was realizing what I had waited years to make happen. The walls weren't closing in. They had already closed. Leonard had been there the night before. He had seen me whisper something to the president. He didn't know what it was, but he saw the president's face change instantly. Not confused, not annoyed, just resigned. That kind of expression doesn't come from surprise. It comes from inevitability. Now Leonard was connecting the dots. He remembered the Series B funding, the trust, the fact that he never quite understood who negotiated the final terms, that there were always third-party considerations listed in the footnotes of the operating agreement. It had been abstract then, some ghost in the machine. Not anymore. More people began appearing in the hallway, murmuring. IT had sent out a blanket response. Systems temporarily offline for compliance auditing. Please stand by for further instruction. Phones weren't just down, they were rerouted. No one could access client data. No one could even open the internal HR dashboard. Even the espresso machine required a badge scan, and now it just flashed red. At 8:42, the president walked in. No security, no entourage, just a thin leather folder under his arm. People turned. A hush fell, like they thought he might reassure them. He didn't. An update is coming shortly, he said, nodding once. Karen raised an eyebrow. That's it. You're not going to say what's going on. He didn't answer, just kept walking down the hall to his office. Okay, she said, her voice too bright now. That's real cute. I'll call the board. Leonard didn't say anything, but the color was draining from his face. He wasn't smiling anymore, because he wasn't an idiot. He remembered, then, the small detail buried in one of the financing rounds, how they'd agreed to allow the blind trust an observer seat on board decisions. A trust they never thought would exercise its power. He knew who really held the keys. Karen? She was still catching up, still thinking this was about feelings, about a bruised ego and an overreaction. She didn't yet understand what kind of machine she'd fed all these years, and how easily it could chew through everything she thought she built. 10:02 a.m. The sound of Outlook chimes echoed like distant artillery. One by one, heads popped up over cubicle walls. Mouse clicks slowed. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Someone said, "What the hell?" loud enough to be heard 3 desks over. It took less than 10 seconds before the words spread like a virus. Check your email. Karen was halfway through complaining to Leonard about how IT must be using interns again when she saw Sophie's face go white. The girl had her phone in one hand, the other clamped over her mouth. Karen snatched her own phone off the charger, thumbed into the inbox, and froze. Subject: Company acquisition and operational closure notice. From internal comms, do not reply. Time: 10:02 a.m. She tapped it open. Effective immediately, ownership of the company has transferred. All positions are dissolved, pending asset review. Details to follow. No header. No logo. Just plain black text on a white background, written with all the warmth of a death certificate. There was a moment, maybe 2 seconds, where Karen didn't react. Just stared, as if her brain was waiting for the rest of the message to load. A punchline. An explanation. Something. Then the murmurs started. Dissolved? What does that mean? Like, dissolved. Pending asset review. Are they liquidating? My badge just locked me out. I just got booted from Teams. Panic doesn't always look like people screaming. Sometimes it looks like silence. Frozen hands. Eyes darting. 100 professionals all blinking in unison, trying to process the fact that everything they thought was solid had just evaporated under their feet. Karen bolted from her chair so fast the wheels screeched against the carpet. Her heels clacked a sharp rhythm as she stomped toward the president's office, the same one I had approached the night before. The door was open. Inside, nothing. No president. No laptop. No stack of legal pads he always scribbled on with his Mont-Blanc pen. The whiteboard had been wiped clean. The framed photo of his daughter that sat near the window? Gone. All that remained was the faint imprint where his nameplate had been screwed into the drywall. Karen stood there, chest heaving. Where the F? She started, then caught herself as 2 interns walked by, wide-eyed and whispering. She turned to Sophie, who had followed her. Call him. Now. Sophie shook her head. His number's out of service. I tried. Karen turned to Leonard, who had only just started moving. This has to be a mistake. There's no way this went through without board approval. No one notified compliance. The audit isn't even closed. How does this happen overnight? Leonard didn't answer. He was scrolling through the email again, as if a second read might reveal something he missed. His thumb hovered, hesitated, then opened the attachment at the bottom of the message, a scanned copy of the acquisition notice, complete with the seal of Polaris Strat Holdings. Stamped, signed, and time-stamped. Karen snatched the phone out of his hand and stared at it, lips parting. Polaris, she said, like she'd just seen a ghost crawl out of the floor. That name, she had said it with venom a dozen times in the past. Called them vultures, soulless acquisition bots, everything wrong with capitalism. She once bragged to her yoga instructor that she'd personally blocked 3 offers from them because she wouldn't sell out the culture she built. Only now, culture didn't matter. What mattered was ink on paper. And the ink said Polaris owned everything. She stormed back into her office and grabbed her personal laptop, praying she could still VPN in, access anything, call someone at Polaris, stop this somehow. But the moment she entered her login, access denied. She pulled out her phone and tried to text her compliance lead, undeliverable. Tried her board liaison, no voicemail, just a disconnect tone. Tried me, straight to voicemail. She heard her own voice say, "He's probably pouting," on repeat in her head like a looped insult boomeranging back with interest. The mocking place card was still in her purse. For some reason, she found herself reaching for it, as if it might serve as a relic of her certainty, proof that she had been in control just 24 hours earlier. She felt her breath catch as the first tears welled, not of sadness, of disorientation. The walls hadn't caved in. They had vanished. No warning, no fight, just a clean, surgical extraction of everything she thought was hers. Behind her, in the hallway, someone was crying. Phones rang and rang, but no one answered. In her office, Karen sat down slowly, blinking at her reflection in the black screen of a locked laptop. Somewhere in the building, a printer spit out a final page, the new ownership memo from Polaris. No fanfare, no thank you, just a line at the bottom. All internal positions subject to reevaluation. Communication will follow at the discretion of transitional counsel. She was no longer a partner, no longer an executive, not even an employee, just another name removed from the system. Leonard pulled her into the side corridor like he was dragging her out of a burning building, though in reality the flames had already done their work. People rushed past them, some clutching coffee cups as if normalcy could still be clutched, others with phones to their ears barking the same question into disconnected lines. What do we do now? HR was locked. Legal wasn't answering. Their entire infrastructure had become a ghost town with functioning lights. Karen looked dazed. She'd started the morning rehearsing remarks for a potential Forbes Women in Business feature. Now her Slack account had disappeared, and the only message in her inbox was a corporate obituary. Leonard shut the hallway door behind them. His face, usually smug and ruddy with confidence, looked chalk white and tight around the jaw. He didn't start with a question. He started with a fact. "Did you know your husband?" He trailed off. No sarcasm, no bluster, just silence, hanging there like a noose between them. Karen blinked. What about him? Leonard's eyes shifted. Not like he was thinking, like he was remembering. That trust. That damn trust from the Series B. At the time, he'd made fun of it in the boardroom. Called it boilerplate protection. Said this silent investor language was overkill. He even laughed to one of the consultants that only a paranoid accountant would write clauses like that. But the money was clean, the paperwork solid, and Karen? She waved it through. She didn't ask questions. She was too busy with branding, client dinners, and building a culture of curated excellence. She said it herself. We needed liquidity. My husband knew a guy. Leonard now realized her husband was the guy. He didn't finish his sentence. He didn't need to. Karen's breath hitched before she caught it and painted on the familiar smile. The same one she used when clients asked too many questions. Don't be dramatic, she said, trying for a chuckle. He wouldn't even know how to structure something like this. But even she didn't believe it. Not anymore. The facts were lining up too quickly. Why the president had nodded to him with such reverence last night. Why IT had gone dark in perfect, synchronized waves. Why Polaris had moved with no negotiation, no room for a counteroffer, no plea for retention packages. This hadn't been a hostile takeover. It had been an invitation. And someone, her husband, had opened the door from the inside. Leonard stared at her, searching her face for any sign that she had known, that she was in on it. But she wasn't. And that made it worse. Because if the partner of the man behind the curtain didn't even know the curtain existed, then what the hell were the rest of them? He set this up? She asked, but it wasn't really a question. Her voice cracked right after the word this, like it betrayed her before she could put it back in her chest. She looked down the hallway, as if expecting to see him walk in. Maybe still in the same tie he wore last night. Maybe with that quiet, unreadable expression of his, like the world around him didn't concern him, but he concerned it. Leonard shook his head slowly. It was him. It had to be. She leaned against the wall, suddenly aware of how dry her mouth was. The tiles were too bright. The noise too loud. She could hear someone sobbing behind a closed door. Somewhere, someone cursed the company's name under their breath. Another email hit. A formal shutdown of all company credit cards and autopay vendor accounts. The business was bleeding out. Neatly. Intentionally. Karen laughed again. It was forced and ragged. You really think he has the balls to? She stopped herself. Because she remembered the name card. Idiot trash. She remembered the look on his face when he saw it. Not shocked. Not hurt. Just quiet. Not the kind of quiet that comes from shame. The kind that comes from calculation. She had mistaken that silence for weakness. Leonard leaned closer, voice low. He didn't need balls. He had control. And we handed it to him wrapped in ribbon and a bottle of Napa Cab. She wanted to scream. At Leonard. At the president. At herself. At him. But she didn't. Because deep down, she knew this wasn't vengeance. It wasn't about payback or pride. This was the slow, deliberate unspooling of a trap built with patience and silence. And she had laughed right into it. It dropped at 2:37 p.m., tucked between a midday traffic update and a fluff piece about rooftop gardening on the local news site. The headline was clinical, the kind you scroll past if you're not in the industry. Polaris Strat announces strategic acquisition of regional competitor, full integration planned. But for everyone still lingering in the glass and steel husk of Karen's former empire, it was less a headline and more a gunshot. The statement was short, tidy, unapologetic. We welcome this strategic consolidation and are committed to maximizing shareholder value while aligning personnel needs with future operational focus. That last part, aligning personnel needs with future operational focus, landed like a guillotine blade. It meant exactly one thing. Don't bother packing a lunch for tomorrow. By 2:40, the message had circulated through every department, every group chat, every personal device still connected to cellular data. Screenshots filled inboxes. Group threads exploded. Some tried parsing the phrasing like amateur lawyers. Others didn't bother. They knew what it meant. The legacy team, gone. The executive tier, obliterated. The culture Karen curated with Pinterest boards and recycled TED Talk quotes, deleted. And the ones who thought they'd be spared? The top performers? The rainmakers? They were realizing that no one had been consulted. Not even Karen. Especially not Karen. She stood in the center of the operations floor, phone in hand, staring at the statement like it was written in a dead language. Leonard had already disappeared into some corner office, talking frantically into a Bluetooth headset that no longer connected to anyone worth calling. Karen had tried to dial the Polaris liaison listed in the press release. A woman named Valerie Drummond, Executive VP of Strategic Mergers. The line rang once, then dumped her to voicemail. She tried again, straight to disconnect. A slow wave of realization settled across her face. Not panic. Not anger. Something colder. Recognition. Polaris hadn't come to save anything. They weren't going to streamline operations or restructure leadership. They were going to consume everything. Chew the brand for parts. Fold the valuable assets, IP, contracts, client portfolios, into their massive, faceless system. And the people? They were already ghosts. The most brutal part wasn't the firing. It was the erasure. No farewell meetings. No exit interviews. No last team lunches. Just an impersonal statement sent to the media before half the firm had even packed their things. Karen tried to rally the remaining staff. Called an emergency alignment meeting. Only 6 people showed up. 2 left mid-call when they got deactivated calendar notices. One asked if they should start applying elsewhere. She blinked at them, mute. Even the interns had stopped pretending. They were whispering now, just like the night before. But not about her. Not about Leonard. Not about the deal. They were whispering about him. The husband. The placeholder. The punchline. The one who sat through dinner without saying a word, while she laughed with her boss over a name card that should have been a warning label. They asked things like, wait, he was the trustee? Did she know? Why didn't he say anything? And the question that stung her more than all the others. Was he always that smart, or did she just never notice? Karen walked back into her office. Well, what used to be her office. The keycard reader had gone dark. She pushed the door open before it locked entirely. The screens were off. The chair was missing. She sat down on the floor, back against the glass. Outside, across the skyline, The sun had started dipping behind the city towers. Long shadows fell across the floor like ink spills. She opened her purse and pulled out the place card again. It had been folded, creased at the center, a little wine stain on the edge from the night before. She ran her thumb over the letters. Idiot trash. Except she wasn't holding it the same way anymore. Because maybe the trash hadn't been him. Maybe the idiot. Well, that part didn't need spelling out anymore. And somewhere, in a room she no longer had access to, a man she had dismissed for years was sipping coffee with Daniel Lowenstein, watching Polaris execute their plan with the exact elegance they'd both envisioned. Not for revenge, for control. And now, the only person in control was the one they'd all ignored. The sky was bleeding orange by the time the last printers went quiet. The humming fluorescent lights overhead flickered without rhythm now, reacting to no one. They'd been programmed for occupancy, motion sensors set to save money. But the people were gone. There was nothing left to sense. The parking lot, once a sea of leased Lexuses and company-labeled Teslas, was down to a half-dozen stragglers. One of them, a copywriter named Reggie, stood frozen beside his Civic, holding a cardboard box like it weighed more than it should. Inside was a potted plant, a framed meme, and a book on brand storytelling no one had ever opened. He didn't get in his car, just stood there, staring at the building like it had personally betrayed him. Security had taken over the front entrance by now. Not the usual smiling greeters with lanyards and iPads, but contracted professionals, ex-military, judging by the stance. No chatter, no questions, just stoic eyes and folded arms, watching former employees drift out with the quiet disbelief of people who hadn't just lost jobs, but identities. Karen stood behind the tinted glass wall of her office, watching it all unfold below. The chairs were gone. The desk, cleared. Her nameplate had been removed, so cleanly the dust around it still outlined her first initial. A few wires curled out of the floor like orphan nerves. Someone had unhooked her monitor without asking. She'd spent years building this office. Years designing every aesthetic angle, brushed gold lamp, reclaimed wood credenza, framed black and white photos of thought leaders she never actually read. She once said, "The environment should reflect power before you even open your mouth." Now it just reflected absence. She clutched the place card in her palm like a talisman. Idiot trash. It had been a joke. A throwaway jab between wine refills and cheap laughter. Something she and Leonard cooked up as a bit after hearing her husband didn't understand her firm's new business model. She hadn't expected him to show up at the event. He rarely did anymore. Too many social climbs, too much effort to stay relevant in a room that didn't want him. But he had shown up, had looked her in the eye, had sat there and taken it, and then left. Just like that. She'd assumed he'd sulk. Maybe sleep in the guest room for a week. Maybe bring it up in a therapy session like a martyr. But now the staff she once ordered around like pawns were walking out of her life with boxes they didn't even get to pack properly. Her firm, was officially a Polaris asset. The integration team had already scheduled building access audits and paper shredding. An entire brand, identity, mission, reduced to line items in someone else's spreadsheet. And him? He hadn't called. Not a single message. Not even a smirk or a cryptic, "I told you so." Just silence. Cold, perfect silence. That was the part she couldn't shake. Because silence means planning. Silence means choice. The kind of silence that watches you destroy yourself and simply notes the time it took. She sat down on the edge of the windowsill, knees bent, heels clicking softly as they settled against the steel. Her hand tightened around the place card. The crease in the middle was deeper now. Her thumb had smudged part of the ink. There was no one to call. The board had disbanded. The president had transitioned. Leonard had disappeared entirely, possibly lawyering up or day drinking in a downtown hotel. And her? She had no badge, no staff, no platform to scream from. Only one name stuck to her now. The woman who mocked her husband and lost everything. She thought she'd built an empire. Turns out, it was scaffolding tied to a single thread. And the man she ridiculed? He wasn't just the thread. He'd been the architect the entire time. She waited until after sunset to call him. Maybe she thought the dark would make it feel less pathetic. Maybe she thought she could catch him in a moment of humanity. Off guard, tired, softened. That somehow, buried beneath the controlled demolition he'd orchestrated, he'd still want to hear her voice. Still feel something. The phone rang once. Just once. Then voicemail. His voice was calm. Not cruel. Not cold. Just precise, like everything else he'd done. "You made your opinions clear. Now I've made mine. All further contact goes through legal." No sigh. No pause. Just a door locking quietly on the other side of a life she used to control. She held the phone for a second longer, like maybe it would come back to life if she just willed it. But it stayed dark. And so did the room. Then her laptop pinged. One last email. No subject line. Just a sender. Daniel Lowenstein. She opened it with a numb click. As trustee, my client has no further business with your firm. That was it. No sign-off. No kind regards. No softening language. Just a line that may as well have been chiseled in granite. Below it, one attachment. Sale_confirmation_final_executed.pdf. She clicked. The document opened in full screen. Signatures. Seals. Routing numbers. Completion timestamped to the minute. Polaris now owned the firm in its entirety. The trust had divested with zero residuals, zero payouts, and zero obligation to notify any former officers. The transfer of ownership was complete. Irrevocable. There would be no appeals. No calls to the board. No talk it out over wine, reconciliation. He hadn't just walked away. He'd burned the bridge, buried the ashes, and rerouted the river. She collapsed into the chair, not the one she used to command meetings from. That chair was gone, rolled out by Polaris interns who didn't know or care whose name used to be engraved on the back. No, this one was hard plastic, left behind by someone from facilities. It squeaked when she moved. She didn't. Her eyes stayed fixed on the screen. On that line. My client has no further business with your firm. Not with you. Not with Karen. Not even a flicker of sentiment. He hadn't needed to destroy her. He just needed to remove her access. The most humiliating part wasn't that she lost the company. It wasn't even that everyone knew. It was that she still didn't know when he had started. When had he first realized she didn't respect him? When had he quietly retained the attorney? When had he crafted the escape hatch and just waited for her to walk into the fire herself? She thought of the night she handed him the place card. Called it a joke. Laughed when Leonard said, "He's more of a cautionary tale than a husband." She remembered seeing him just smile and nod, like he was taking attendance. She remembered saying, "He doesn't understand how this world works." And now she understood. He didn't need to understand her world. He just had to know where the levers were. And he'd been standing behind the curtain the whole time, hand on the master switch. This wasn't revenge. Revenge is messy, personal. It leaves fingerprints. This was something colder, cleaner. This was justice. And the man they all thought didn't understand power? He didn't just understand it. He redefined it. Quietly. Thoroughly. Irrevocably.